The House of the Forsaken remained undisturbed in the days following Gideon's arrival. No one came knocking, no shadows lingered at their doorstep, and the heavy fear of pursuit slowly dissipated, replaced by the comforting rhythm of everyday life. Gideon, despite the heavy loss of his father, found solace in the familiar act of baking. Early each morning, long before the other children stirred, he would rise and make his way to the small kitchen, his hands moving with practiced ease. His father's lessons came back to him with every fold of dough and turn of the rolling pin. He experimented with the old stone oven, carefully mastering the balance of heat, until the house was filled with the warm, inviting aroma of freshly baked bread and aurora crescents, delicate pastries glazed with honey and sea salt, their citrus drizzle capturing the tropical essence of Meridia's maritime trade. The scent was a poignant reminder of a life he had left behind, yet it also stood as a testament to his enduring resilience. His creations quickly became a source of joy for the children of the House of the Forsaken. They eagerly awaited his flaky crescents, sweetened rolls, and hearty loaves, and the warm, buttery aroma soon became a hallmark of morning in their hidden sanctuary. It was Gideon's way of contributing, of offering a piece of himself to this new family that had taken him in when he was lost. "Best baker in Meridia," Vash would tease, patting Gideon on the back after sampling yet another delicious treat. And for a brief moment Gideon would smile, a true, unguarded smile that spoke of healing wounds. Vash, Silas and Gideon sharpened their talents in the streets of Meridia, each bringing a unique edge to the trio. Silas mastered the art of blending into crowds, teaching his companions how to slip unnoticed through even the most watchful gatherings, using charm and distraction to divert attention at critical moments. Vash, with quick hands and an unmatched instinct for stealth, showed them how to vanish into the shadows, his fingers deftly claiming purses and keys as if the city itself conspired to keep him hidden. He became the mastermind, always plotting their most daring heists, drawn to the promise of greater and greater riches. And then there was Gideon, the group's strength, a force beyond sleight and silence, a presence that could shift a scene from subtle to chaos in a heartbeat. When all else failed, Gideon would step in, his brawling prowess both a shield and a distraction, drawing eyes away from his friends. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and long shadows crept through the city, Silas returned to the house with a spark of mischief in his eyes. Leaning in, he murmured, "You remember last week, don't you, Vash? That emissary from Eldoria." Gideon, noticing the mischievous exchange between them, raised an eyebrow and frowned. "Wait a second. What happened last week? You two snuck off without me." He crossed his arms, the hint of a playful challenge in his tone. Silas chuckled, sharing a glance with Vash. "Oh, it was something, all right. Last week we got ourselves onto that fancy Eldorian ship before it even docked. The emissary's quarters were practically a treasure trove." "Aye," Vash added, his grin wide. "Easy pickings. Goblets of pure Eldorian silver, coin purses heavy as anchors, all just lying there for the taking." Silas nodded, a sly grin spreading across his face as he leaned closer. "I just spotted another ship docking, same emblem as before, definitely Armada. It's got to be an escort for another diplomat." Gideon's eyes sparkled with excitement as he brushed flour from his hands. "Whatever the Armada's got down at the docks tonight, I'm in." His tone half amused, half annoyed. "You're not leaving me behind this time." Vash smirked, always eager for an adventure. "Let's see what treasure's waiting for us this time, then." They moved under the cover of darkness, the three of them slipping through alleyways and scaling rooftops until they reached the edge of the port. The docks were alive with activity even at this hour. Lanterns bobbed in the salty breeze, casting flickering light upon the bustling figures, moving cargo from ships to warehouses. But amidst the controlled chaos stood one ship that commanded attention, an imposing vessel with the Armada's sigil emblazoned on its sails. "That's it," Silas murmured, nodding toward the vessel. "But there's at least half a dozen guards patrolling the gangplank and the cargo hold." Vash observed the guards intently, his sharp eyes tracking the subtle patterns in their movements, the way they adjusted their stances, the cadence of their patrols. Leaning closer, he murmured, "There are more guards this time. Definitely tighter security than last week. We'll need a distraction." His gaze shifted to Gideon. "You still have that bottle of oil?" Gideon nodded, pulling a small flask from his satchel. "I can douse those crates near the dock," he suggested. "When the flames start, they'll be too busy putting out the fire to notice us slipping aboard." Silas grinned. "You're learning," he said, clapping Gideon on the shoulder. "Let's do it." They moved swiftly, each step calculated, every sound muffled by the ambient noise of the harbour. Gideon slipped toward a stack of crates, uncorking the flask and dribbling the oil along the wood. He pulled out a flint, struck it once, twice, until a spark caught and the flames began to lick hungrily at the oil-soaked wood. "Fire!" a guard shouted, and in an instant, chaos erupted. The patrols rushed to contain the blaze, and in that moment Vash, Silas and Gideon slipped aboard the vessel, their movements as fluid as the sea itself. As they turned the corner, their breaths caught at the sight before them. Scattered across the dimly lit storage room were objects unlike anything they had ever encountered. Ancient artifacts rested atop weathered crates, intricately carved amulets that glinted faintly even in the low light, weapons with jagged edges and runes etched along their blades, and strange ornaments that seemed to hum with a silent energy. Each item was shrouded in an air of mystery, their origin unknown, and their purpose unfathomable. "Look at this stuff," Vash whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "What kind of treasures are these?" Silas, ever the opportunist, couldn't resist. As he passed a crate overflowing with glimmering trinkets, his quick hands began pocketing the smaller items, an amulet here, a curious ring there. He moved with practiced ease, slipping objects into his satchel as they continued deeper into the hold. One amulet in particular caught his eye. A small, dark medallion shaped like a coiled serpent, its surface polished to an eerie sheen. When his fingers closed around it, a faint, static-like sensation tingled against his skin, enough to make him pause. He frowned, holding it up for a better look, but nothing about its appearance explained the strange reaction. "Silas, keep moving," Gideon hissed, breaking his momentary trance. Shaking off his unease, Silas slipped the amulet into his satchel with the rest. The sensation lingered briefly, a whisper of something he couldn't quite place. Brushing it off, he hurried to catch up with the others, the faint hum of the artifact echoing quietly in the back of his mind. The air grew thicker with each step, clinging to their skin like an unseen shroud. It was stifling, laden with the scent of damp wood and salt, mingling with something darker, metallic and sharp, like blood long dried. The faint rhythmic sound of water dripping echoed through the hold, a ghostly metronome that only heightened the oppressive silence. Then they saw it. A massive cage, forged from iron bars, as thick as a man's arm, its surface slick with condensation that caught the faint glow of a nearby lantern. The cage loomed in the shadows, its edges swallowed by the dim light, yet its sheer size made it clear this was no prison for a man but a beast. A sound emanated from within, low and guttural. Laboured breaths rasped through the air, broken occasionally by a wet, rattling growl. Whatever lay beyond those bars was alive, though wounded. Its movements were uneasy, a restless shifting that sent faint shivers through the iron frame of its prison. Vash and Gideon exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado replaced with a cold dread. "What's in here?" Gideon whispered, his voice barely audible above the faint echoes of dripping water. Vash took a cautious step closer, peering into the gloom, though his feet felt leaden. "Not a diplomat, that's for sure," he muttered, trying to mask his unease with a wry quip. They both leaned closer, their eyes straining to pierce the darkness within the cage. But the shadows clung to their secrets, impenetrable and malevolent. Something shifted again, the rasping breaths growing louder and the hair on the back of their necks prickled. Neither dared step closer. Behind them, Silas remained unusually quiet, lingering at the edge of the light. His head snapped back suddenly, a sharp pain lancing through him as if a blade had been driven from the base of his skull to the depths of his eye. He winced, clutching his forehead, his free hand brushing against the amulet hidden in his satchel. For a fleeting moment it felt alive, pulsing faintly in time with the pain. Recovering, Silas's gaze was drawn to the cage, as though compelled by some unseen force. The dark interior seemed to beckon him, and as he stared, two ghostly eyes materialized from the shadows. Pale and luminescent, they gleamed like distant stars, fixed on him with a malevolence that was both ancient and unyielding. Without realizing it, Silas stepped forward, his movements mechanical, almost reverent. His fingers brushed the cold iron bars, his forehead coming to rest against them. "Silas, what are you doing?" Vash's voice, sharp with alarm, cut through the silence. Gideon, pale as the moonlight filtering through the cracks in the hull, hissed, "Get back here, are you mad?" But Silas didn't move, his breath shallow, his eyes locked with those glowing orbs. Then it struck. A serpentine figure launched from the shadows with impossible speed, its tail a deadly blur as it lashed out, aiming straight for Silas's chest. Vash reacted instinctively, shoving Silas out of the way and breaking whatever trance had gripped him. Both boys hit the ground hard, the impact jolting Silas back to his senses. The creature reared back, its sinuous body coiling as it prepared to strike again. Its scales shimmered faintly as it moved closer to the light, a monstrous serpentine form marred with wounds but radiating a terrifying power. Its tail lashed out once more, narrowly missing Vash as he scrambled to drag Silas further from its reach. Gideon, frozen in fear, finally saw the beast in its full, terrible glory. It was unlike anything he had imagined, though its shape was eerily familiar. Tales long whispered in childhood surged to the forefront of his mind. Legends of cursed sailors twisted by dark magic into monsters of the deep. His voice was barely a whisper, trembling with recognition. Corsairs. Of the Crimson Tide. Vash's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to steady his breath. "I didn't think they were real," he managed, his words tinged with disbelief and horror. The beast lunged once more, its glowing eyes burning with fury and hunger, and the boys knew they were face to face with a nightmare made flesh, a wounded but still deadly relic of the sea's darkest myths. The Corsair's roar reverberated through the hold, shaking the walls and spurring them to action. Vash grabbed Silas by the arm, hauling him to his feet. "We have to go, now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Silas stumbled but nodded, clutching his satchel as they moved. The clamour of guards echoed from the deck above. Heavy boots clattered against the wooden stairs as a group descended toward the hold. "They're coming," Gideon hissed, eyes wide. "Hide," Vash ordered, pulling them behind a stack of barrels. The three of them crouched low, holding their breath as the guards passed, their torches casting flickering shadows on the walls. When the last of the patrol disappeared into the gloom, Vash motioned silently, and they slipped from their hiding spot, climbing the stairs toward the deck. The air grew cooler as they emerged, the night alive, with shouts, as the crew scrambled to contain the chaos below. With the guards still preoccupied by the fire they had started, shouts rang out as men hauled buckets of water and barked frantic orders. The chaos provided the perfect cover, and the trio moved swiftly and silently, staying low as they crept toward the ship's edge, shadows masking their flight. "There," Vash whispered, pointing to a loose mooring rope trailing into the water. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and slid over the edge, lowering himself down. The rough fibers bit into his hands, but he gritted his teeth and splashed into the cold water below. "Come on," he urged, looking up. Gideon followed quickly, landing with a quiet splash. Silas hesitated, his gaze flicking back toward the ship, but another roar from the hold snapped him out of it. He clambered down the rope, hitting the water unsteadily before Vash grabbed him to steady him. The three swam away from the ship, their movements silent but urgent. The noise from the deck, shouts, clanging metal and the corsairs' guttural cries, faded the farther they went, until only the lapping of water against their limbs remained. They didn't stop until the lights of the ship were distant specks against the horizon. Exhausted and drenched, they pulled themselves onto a quiet stretch of the docks, collapsing onto the damp wood as the night enveloped them in silence. When they finally collapsed onto the floor, panting and covered in sweat, Gideon turned to Vash, his eyes wide with disbelief. You saved him. You saved us." Vash gave a shaky laugh, his adrenaline still thrumming through his veins. "Couldn't let him get eaten by a giant snake, could I?" Silas let out a weak chuckle, brushing the water from his face. "Remind me to stop listening to my own great ideas. They're going to get us killed one day." They dragged themselves to their feet, their breath still labored, and began the slow walk back to the house of the Forsaken. The streets of Meridia, usually a source of comfort and life, felt unusually quiet, the shadows stretching longer than they should. As they approached the familiar sanctuary, Silas glanced over his shoulder, his brow furrowed. "Did you feel it?" he asked, his voice low. "Feel what?" Gideon asked, stopping just short of the door. Silas hesitated, then shook his head. "Never mind." But even as they crossed the threshold into safety, a chill lingered in the air, an unspoken promise that the night's horrors had only just begun.